everything is really an opportunity to grow and to heal and to reconnect to ourselves as we go along our path.
When we go through things that are stressful growing up, our mind and body are quick to make adaptations. We're going to create some sort of habit in the form of survival that at the beginning is very adaptive and very useful.
Our trauma and painful experiences influence everything we think, feel, and do.
Sometimes trauma is not what happened, it's what didn't happen.
We're all trying to protect ourselves at every moment and get our needs met. And we're going to do that in any way we can.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Flip Your Mindset. I am your host, Stacey Uhrig, and today's guest is Sherry D'Elia. I'm so excited to have Sherry on today because Sherry comes to us as a psychotherapist. So as you guys know, I love to jam out with people who are in the know of the things that we talk about here on this podcast. But what we're going to do today is really talk about Sherry's story, because here's the thing. Everybody walks with a story. Whoever's listening, you are not alone. Everybody has a story. Everybody has a series or a combination of circumstances, events, things that happen early on in childhood that impact us. And for some of us, it causes us to want to go into a healing space. For others people, so not so much. But, you know, we all come to life with our own set of lived experiences, and they impact us all. So today, Sherry's not coming on to talk so much about her practice per se as a psychotherapist, but more about what brought her to psychotherapy to begin with, which is probably her story. So welcome. How are you?
Thank you so much, Stacey, for having me today. I'm excited and a little nervous about being here today because I'm not as grounded as I was hoping to be because life happens. And I had a big trigger last night and I've been spending my day working through it. And I'm said to myself, things always happen the way they're meant to happen. So it was interesting to me that happened today. And I am excited to share my story because my story is really about how everything is really an opportunity to grow and to heal and to reconnect to ourselves as we go along our path.
And that's really what it is. It's a journey, right?
Exactly.
So what year does your story begin?
So my story begins really when I was 15.
So how old, what year would that have been for you?
So I'm 56.
Okay.
So we're talking, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
41 years ago where my story started. My parents called my sisters and I into their bedroom and sat us all in a circle. I have two sisters. And my mom elbows my dad and says, "Tell them, Russ, tell them." And my dad says, "I'm leaving you girls and your mother for another woman." So my sisters start to cry hysterically. And I very calmly say, "Well, if you're not happy together, you shouldn't be together." And I just remember feeling like, wow, like, look at how mature I am. And there's a part of me that ever since I could remember, I knew that I wanted to be a therapist. So, when I ended up going to college, I wanted to be, to study psychology, but there wasn't money for me to go to college because my parents had divorced. And so I decided to go as a business major, even though I had a love for psychology because I was like, oh, therapy, people in therapy, they don't make any money. So I studied business and I would sit in these these auditoriums with 500 students taking economics, accounting, statistics, and I would find myself cheating off of, I always thought people said Chinese people are smart. So I would find myself cheating, looking, filling in the same bubbles as them because it was so hard for me. And I was struggling desperately getting C's. And I took my electives in psychology, and it was simple. And I literally was divinely guided. I think I was a junior and in college, and I literally was divinely guided into the advisor's office. And I said, I want to switch my major to psychology. I don't remember having any thoughts about it. I just went, and I needed to continue, go to school over the summer and an extra semester. And I graduated with, a bachelor's in psychology. Then after that, I moved to Boston and I worked in the field for 2 years. And then I moved home because I decided I wanted to go to graduate school. And I remember writing my essay about how wonderful I handled my parents' divorce. And that's what I was meant to be a therapist. And I applied to Columbia and Fordham, and I got into both programs. And I said to myself, oh my God, I got into Columbia. It's an Ivy League. That's my ticket anywhere. But I loved Fordham's program because it was more holistic. And I've just always thought it wasn't just about the mind. It was just about, the whole person. So I decided, my therapist at the time said to me, Sherry, Columbia can get you in the door, but you're going to get yourself where you need to go. So I decided to go to Fordham, and it was amazing. And I got my first job out of college, which I knew I would. I was like, oh, like I'm meant to do this. This is easy. Like I'm great at this. Like I never had any fear any step of the way. So I'm in my first job at the Southern Connecticut Mental Health and Substance Abuse Treatment Center, and I'm seeing clients regularly every single day, have this big caseload. And all of a sudden, Stacey, I was getting triggered like you would not believe. Like I was in a multi-pinball machine. I would start to fall asleep. I would glaze over. I would just completely disconnect from myself. I would go home. Thank God I didn't have kids at the time, under the covers with anxiety and depression, saying, oh my God, like, how could I think I was good at this? This is
And
horrible.
how did the anxiety and depression present for you at the time?
So I was so thrown, like it was a disconnect. I was thrown, like everything that I thought I knew, I was doubting. I was like, it made no sense to me that something I thought I was so good at, that now I was sitting here and I was not able to stay present and I didn't know what to say. So it was like a collapse. Like I just didn't even want to be in the world. Like I just wanted to go and hide. And I couldn't understand what was happening. But then I had a supervisor that was amazing. And she explained to me that I had repressed my trauma and painful experiences from my childhood. And that's what was coming up as I was listening to all of these people's stories. So right there, it clicked. I'm like, oh, so not only am I here to help people to find themselves, but every single person in every situation is helping me to collect the pieces of myself too that I lost along the way.
Mm. Okay, let's just sit with that for a second because people don't understand that as psychotherapists, therapists, coaches, like anybody that's in the mental health space,
Yeah,
we learn from every single client, not just how to be better at what we're doing, but about ourselves. Because we're
exactly.
so aware and so attuned to what's going on in our own system, so we can be present, that when we know we're being triggered, it's such an opportunity for us to say what's going on there and what do I still have yet to work through? Because what you and I were talking about, off camera and off mic was you were saying, and you said this at the beginning, that you've been feeling triggered today. And I was like, well, that's a great thing to be able to talk about on the podcast because we're not superhuman. We're human.
Right.
We
Exactly.
do feel the same things everybody else feels. And even though we've been doing the work, we still get triggered. And I think at least the difference for me is I'm not in the space for days and weeks at a time like I used to be. I'm in
Exactly.
it for like a day or two,
Exactly.
right? Max.
I always say the symptomology will decrease in frequency, duration, and intensity.
Intensity. I say the same thing. I say exactly the same thing. And that's what I say to my clients. Look, there's never a silver bullet. But
Right.
my goal for you is that you're going to walk away from having worked with me with a set of tools and techniques that are going to lessen the frequency, the duration, and the intensity when you are feeling triggered, right?
Exactly.
So, what did you learn about yourself during that time? How did you go back? What was unprocessed for you? I guess is a question I had.
Oh gosh, so many things. My parents divorced that I pretend like, oh, if you're not happy, you shouldn't be together. So I learned to disconnect. So as the different things were happening in my childhood, I adapted by just disconnecting from myself and pretending that everything was fine.
So I love that you use the word adapted because we know, and it's something that's so important as I use this podcast as an educational tool for people that are listening, is that when we go through things that are stressful growing up, our mind and body are quick to make adaptations, right? We're going to create some sort of habit in the form of protection, in the form of survival, that at the beginning is very adaptive and very useful, but over a long period of time, especially further away from the incident and the event, becomes kind of maladaptive because it's hindering you versus helping you,
Exactly. I say the
right?
same. What was once adaptive becomes maladaptive because
Right.
it's
And
hurting you.
so, this idea of disconnection or, disassociation is really this technique that we quickly pull on, which is to basically step away from the situation, right? So, like when we hear about flight and fight and freeze and fawn, I always see that disconnect as like that freeze or that flight where you're literally leaving your body in a little bit of a respect and just disconnecting from self. So I'm curious for you, because for me, disconnecting from self, I do so much in the parts work space. If you
Mhm.
have this concept of being self-led and self-leadership, to me, the disconnect or the disassociation is allowing this other part in protection of you, this adaptive part, to come forward that almost creates like a barrier or a block to yourself so you don't
Mhm.
have to feel that pain. Do you see it that way?
Well, I see it, yes, that part comes up because I'm afraid and they're trying to protect.
Mhm.
And then I work with that part to get to know and understand what they're there for and what memory is coming to the surface for healing.
Right. But in
Whether
that
it's
moment, when you're 14, 15, 16 years old, you have no idea that that's what's happening.
exactly,
Did you
exactly.
find that you disconnected at other times as well before you got into this clinical therapy setting?
I did not realize, like, I think it gets clearer and clearer and clearer. So I had a history of abuse that I remember telling my boyfriend when I was a teenager, but I didn't realize the impact of that. So as
Mm.
I've gone through my journey, and that's what got triggered last night a piece of it that as I go, it gets another layer and another layer and another layer, because our trauma and painful experiences influence everything we think, feel, and do. And as we go on our journey and reconnect more to ourselves, um, we feel more and more joy and peace and connection with ourselves.
Right.
So there are things that I still don't totally remember. There are, my history was very colorful. It was very colorful. There was a lot of trauma. I grew up in the age where there was physical discipline. Parents weren't emotionally attuned. My parents yelled. They didn't talk to us, and everything that was going. My dad had substance abuse problems. My dad was cheating on my mom. There were a lot of things happening and nobody talked about it. So for years, you're in a situation that the message is all of this stuff is going on around you and you can't talk about it. And for me, I learned to comply and to not
Mhm.
speak up and to not say anything, whether that was a direct or an indirect message.
Right. And I love that you shared this because, I've run almost 100 interviews at this point over the last few years. And when I very first started the podcast, my whole mission was basically exactly what you just said. I grew up, I'm 52, you said you're 56, like we grew up in the 70s and the 80s. And there was this implicit message, it wasn't necessarily spoken, that was do not air your dirty laundry and definitely don't burden people with your problem. But if there's one thing I've learned as a trauma recovery coach is that we are hardwired as humans for connection. And when we feel disconnected or there's a fear of disconnection, it is very traumatic to the nervous system because it's not natural for our nervous system as human beings. So when we've been kind of taught to not share and to basically disconnect when connection's required the most. So when we're under duress, disconnect, but that's when we need to be connecting the most. Gabor Mate has said many times that sometimes trauma is not what happened. Sometimes it's not what happens, it's what didn't happen. But then he'll also say, but it's also going through it and not having anybody able to talk to.
Exactly. It's that lack of support, I think,
It's
is
the
the
lack of
worst.
support. I have one of
Mhm.
my most favorite books is this book called What Happened to You by Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey.
Mhm.
I don't know if you
Mm.
have it, but it is
Oh,
a
I'll have to write
phenomenal
that.
book.
What happened to you? It's called.
What Happened to You? And it's
Mhm.
written by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. And it's easy book to read. And I love to actually listen to it because it's just an interview. It's just them going back and forth. So even in the book, one of them has a certain text color and the other has a different text color. And it's a conversation about childhood development and trauma. And I went to the trauma foundation conference in Boston last May, and they were talking about this book. And I read this book a few years ago, and they were all saying in the conference, what a great book it is, but that the title was missing something. And they said it really shouldn't be called What Happened to You. It should be called What Happened to You and Who Could You Go to? So
Mm.
again, to this point of we're hardwired to go to. It's part
Mm.
of our nature to seek support. It takes a village. We were evolutionarily coming from village communities where it takes a village. And now we're saying, no, do it in a silo, do it in isolation. It's not natural for us. And then to your point, we learn to adapt by disconnecting, disassociating, and dealing with it on our own. But who knows how to process our own feelings when we're under the age of 20, really. And really, let's face it, under the age of like 30, unless you're studying it. So,
Exactly.
that in and of itself is the trauma. I know for me, one of the things I've learned in many of my different modalities of healing that one of my traumas was feeling alone in my experience.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I 100% agree with that.
And, I've said this many times and I'd love your perspective on it, but I always say trauma is never the event. Trauma is how that event was interpreted in your mind, body, and psyche. And that's the lens that was then formed that you saw yourself, others, and the world around you through that's likely hindering your life, right?
Exactly.
So if you know that, what were the interpretations that you made during all those experiences growing up?
Mm. Oh gosh, so many. And they continue to come up and evolve over time. So what I have to say doesn't matter, or I don't matter. If I say how I feel, I'll get yelled at. Oh, there's so many.
But I think those are some of the universal thoughts from the 70s and 80s. And as you're saying it, I'm seeing like the mustard carpet and like the avocado green cabinetry. Like we all know what the 70s felt like and looked like and smelled like. And there was this general consensus of, what are you complaining about? How dare you complain? You've got a roof over your head and you've got food on the table, and I don't want to hear it. So here we are, young beings that are like, I have a feeling I finally have the language and the courage to express it. And it's met with, what are you talking about? You don't know what you're talking about, and I don't want to hear it. So now we're either denied our reality or we're denied our feelings. And I think there was this general consensus of, well, everybody's got that. So what makes me so unique that I would be struggling when I don't think anybody else is struggling? But we don't think anybody else is struggling because we were taught not to share what was going on.
Exactly. And so many of us aren't even aware because we adapt in various ways and keep it tamped down.
Listen, I just redid my website recently. So this is March 1st, 2024. So I just launched a new website last week. And as I was doing it, I'm like, I need to rewrite my bio, like the About Me section. And as I'm writing this About Me section, I'm looking at it. I was like, what the hell have I written here? Like, it was all about like how I became a coach by way of like all my past professional experiences that all naturally led me to become a coach. But what was missing from that whole bio was my own 20 to 25 year struggle and journey with debilitating anxiety and panic. And I was like, oh my God, like I need to get that in here because I need people to know there's a reason why I'm doing what I'm doing, not because I'm a good coach, but because I lived this. And
exactly.
One of the things I wrote in that bio was how it was impacting me physically, the gnawing pit in the stomach, the heaviness on the chest, the clenching of the throat. But to your point, I didn't even know I was walking with anxiety because I'd been walking in that state of being for over 20 years, that was my normal.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I didn't know what life was like not feeling that way.
Right. So sometimes we're not even aware, like you said, that it's an issue. And then sometimes we're aware and it's like, how do I move through this? For me, that was a defining moment when I realized, oh, everyone's helping me. So as I'm helping them. So for me, my symptomology would be if I have a heightened or a disconnected response. If I just don't feel like I'm joyful and peaceful and in the flow of life. So if I'm disconnecting or getting so angry, where I want to, just kill somebody because the rage in me would come up so strong. And those would be my clues like, okay, something's gotten triggered here. And for me, I've looked at life as everything that happens is an opportunity to reconnect to the parts of myself. So even though I was like, oh, I can't believe this just happened, there's another part of me that's like, yes, I'm going to work through this and get a piece of myself back. So no matter what has happened, because life happens and life isn't always great events, things happen that are painful and scary. And no matter what's happening, I use that philosophy and it helps me to get through everything that I
I
have
walk
gone
with
through.
a very, very similar philosophy, which is, every challenge, every hurdle, every obstacle is an opportunity to be like, okay, what am I supposed to get from this one?
Exactly. Exactly. And for the longest time, like for me, like I'm proud of myself that I'm sitting here talking to you today because one of the obstacles was as I um, disconnected from myself as I was sitting with my clients, I moved through things and got more and more comfortable being with my clients and to be one-on-one with a client. It's like one of my favorite things to do. And it's like my best self is with my clients. But there was this little nudge pretty early in my career, maybe like I'm a therapist over 30 years. So maybe at year 10, if not earlier, to want to put my messages out to larger audiences. But then
Mm.
anytime I would try, Stacey, my throat would close up, my brain would shut down, and I'd be like, what on earth is happening here? Because why do I have this strong desire, but then when I go to do it, I can't function. So I would say, oh, maybe when my kids get older, or maybe in my next life, I would try because every time I tried, it just wasn't working. I'm like, okay. And I would work on things within myself, but it still wasn't improving. So then COVID came. And simultaneously, I found out I had nodules in my thyroid. And I went to the endocrinologist, and the endocrinologist said that after a biopsy, said that the nodules weren't cancerous and they weren't benign and they were somewhere in between and they could turn to cancer. And I had watched people like you mentioned, Oprah and all these other people sharing their messages. I'm like, I have all these things to say. Like, I want to go out and say them. But every time I tried, I couldn't because, again, my brain would shut down, my throat would close. So I went home and I looked in my Bible, which is Louise Hay's book, You Can Heal Your
Yeah.
Life.
Oh,
Yeah. And
I
she
have a
talks.
different one. It's called
Yes.
Feelings Buried Alive, Never Die.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Yeah.
You're giving me good reading material today. I look in the book and it said, hurt ego and resentment over your career. So I said to myself, now is the time. I don't want to get my thyroid removed. I don't want to develop cancer here. I need to get my messages out. So when COVID came, I literally felt like my nervous system downloaded in my body because the whole world stopped. And I hadn't realized that, we're talking about not realizing what we're doing. I realized I was just going full speed ahead my whole life to not feel certain things. And I thought I was feeling as I was going along the way, but there was a whole nother layer that I didn't have access to that it felt like my nervous system was downloading into my body. And I took Lee Harris's course, Own Your Value and Earn Your Worth. And I took everything that I had learned and taught over the last 30 years as a psychotherapist, and I put it into a course so that I could put my messages
Mm.
out to larger audiences. It's called Discover Your Roadmap to Healing. And as I went on that journey and I went back to the endocrinologist, each time I went back, she said, "Oh, your nodules decreased by 20%. The next time, 40% without any medical intervention." And she said to me, and I said, "I'm holistic. Let me go home. Let me think," because she was ready to take out my
Oh,
thyroid.
yeah.
And I said, "I am holistic. Let me see what I can do." She goes, "Okay, Sherry, as long as I'll listen to you, as long as you promise me that if your breathing gets hard, you'll let me do the surgery." I said, "I promise you." And each time I went back, it decreased in size. And now, the last time I went to her was a year and a half ago, and I have to go back again for a checkup in 6 months.
Listen, remember before we were talking about when we can process emotions, it'll get smaller in frequency, intensity,
Yeah,
duration. I'm so glad you brought this up because when I talk about this concept with people, it's sometimes they think I'm a little off my rocker and like too woo, but people need to understand this idea of the tears we keep, our bodies weep. What does that mean? It means that when we have unprocessed emotions, so I'm going to use Sherry's example. Growing up, I didn't really feel like I had a voice. I didn't really feel like I could express myself. I didn't really feel like I was being heard. There are a lot of studies that show the correlation to very specific issues like not having a voice, not feeling seen, not feeling heard, and then having issues with that part of your body. So in her
exactly.
case, throat. I mean, how often do we see Hashimoto's, right? And all of these different conditions, autoimmune conditions, revolving the thyroid, involving the throat, where we find out from our clients that they had a very similar experience to what you're talking about, or any kind of experience that left them feeling like they could not express themselves and feel validated, valued, heard, significant. The body adapts. I mean, this is the whole thing has been about adaptability today. The body adapts and takes over, right? And if we know anything about autoimmune, it just attacks itself. So, you have the Louise Hayes book. Mention what that is again.
You can heal your life.
Yes, You Can Heal Your
Yes,
Life by Louise Hayes. And I have
exactly.
a
Here it is.
similar
My
book.
Bible right
Yeah.
here. Yeah, I want to
And
hear
there's
your
a similar book is called Feelings Buried Alive, Never
feelings
Die.
buried.
And it's not uncommon. And my clients who are listening, they know this is true when they're sitting across from me and they have a physical ailment. I'm like, let me get my book. And I just go to the back because the back is like an index.
Exactly.
And I'll say, oh, okay, you're having migraines, or you're having an issue with your throat, or you're having a hip issue, a back issue, a shoulder, whatever it is. And I'm looking it up and I just read off what it is that is simply correlated to this particular
Exactly.
part of the body. And they're like, that's ridiculously accurate.
I know.
And then
It's
we
great.
can talk about it. And, similar to your point where you saw this decreased size of nodule, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis at 48. I'm 52. And I had never in my life ever had pain like I had with that diagnosis. It was a very strange and unique, painful sensation on the very specific pieces of the inside of my joints, of my elbows and my wrists and my ankles and my knees. And I mean, the swelling was, you couldn't see the swelling from the outside, but the inflammation was so bad on the inside, I was bruising. It was the
Mm.
craziest thing I've ever seen. And my fatigue was like off the charts. And I was diagnosed with another autoimmune at 26, which is called Raynaud's, which I had
Mhm.
started struggling with when I was 15. Now, when you go back and you look at my adverse experiences in childhood, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. So, anyway, fast forward to your point. My doctor wants to put me on steroids. And there was just this little gnawing piece of me on the inside that was like, let me get back to you on that. I'm not taking the script with me. I have some things I want to do, but let's continue to monitor. And if what I'm doing is not working, I'll consider. She was like, fair enough. When you're being diagnosed with things like this, and it's important for me to say, my diagnosis was what's known as seronegative rheumatoid arthritis. So what that means is that I had every single symptom, and the inflammation marker in my body was off the charts, which is your C-reactive protein, but the rheumatoid arthritis was not coming up as that marker. So I had all the symptoms except for the rheumatoid itself, but it presented as rheumatoid arthritis. Okay. So I get in my car, and the first thing I do is I feel good that I have a diagnosis. And what I know now, and I'm curious if this is interesting for you, part of the reason why I was so happy I had a diagnosis is because I had been in so much emotional pain throughout my lifetime. Now somebody could actually say, yes, she's in pain. Because nobody was responding to my emotional pain, but now maybe you'll respond to my physical pain. In no way was that conscious, but I do enough work at the subconscious that I could tap into myself and understand that. So it felt like validation in a way, right?
Right. No, that makes sense.
The second thing was I started researching ACEs, like literally from my car in the parking lot, ACEs and rheumatoid arthritis, because I've studied ACEs for many years. I value the study. I value the understanding of how our adverse childhood experiences impact our health. And according to the research, I had like an 80% chance of receiving that diagnosis. Right. So there was an 80% chance that all the things I had experienced was going to cause enough inflammation in my body that that's how it was going to present. So I decided I was going to go to an acupuncturist that I knew that was very trauma trained. And I was going to do an intensive 3 months with her. And what happened on that table was me just literally surrendering. She had a way of doing acupuncture that literally made me feel like I was levitating off the table. It was like, I literally was like leaving my body. And there were times on that table where I would just burst into tears, and I was having these revelations, these aha moments of things. And that's where that I was alone came from. It was a very clear thing that happened to me on the table, which I'll talk about in another podcast. But that number, as I was processing the emotions, went sky high. So as they were continuing to monitor me, I had gone from a 3 to a 6 to a 9 to a 10. And the baseline is 3 for pain, like for the inflammation.
Right.
But then a year later, I was under a 3.
Yes.
Right? I was able to bring it below normal. And I guess what I'm trying to say to people is, some people may say to me, oh, that's nice. I really have rheumatoid arthritis, or I really have Graves, or I really have Hashimoto's, because, it's on the report. Like, I have the numbers. And I'm like, yeah, I did too. Just like your thyroid was X.
Exactly. And I always say that disease is dis-ease of the 100%. Body and spirit.
And so it's important for people to understand that when your body is reacting, or as we were talking earlier, adapting to what happened to you, it can show up on a test. I mean, I've had clients, I ask in my intake form if they've ever been diagnosed with a rare disease or an autoimmune condition. It's almost always there. It's almost always filled out. Sometimes people are filling it out with 3 or 4 different things that they're walking with.
And well, you brought up such a really important point that I want to highlight, that being ill, you weren't alone. So many people, if they don't feel good, that's how a lot of people got attention, like growing up when they were sick. And so us saying to someone, this is just your body's response, and you can um, heal and get better, they aren't interested because that's how they got their attention. So they want to hold on to that.
I'm so glad you brought that up because, yes. And, when we talk about parts, so often we talk about the parts of us that are coming up in form of protection of us, but there are other parts that are coming up to prioritize us. Now, the prioritizing is the protecting because we either feel alone or we feel unseen or we feel unheard, and that's the unhealed wound. But the prioritizing, and I do see this, especially with my clients who have a really hard time physically, sometimes that is their connection to people.
Exactly. Exactly. I used to be the biggest hypochondriac under the sun. I thought I had every disease because that's also how I got attention. If my legs would hurt when I was sleeping, and I'd go into my parents' bed, and I would just feel safer, just to
It's
be.
interesting. I had a gal, and I'll put the link to that particular show in the show notes, but her name is Nikki Redigan. She was on my podcast a handful of times early on, and I met her because we're both practitioners of rapid transformational therapy. And growing up, she mentions this in the podcast, she was one of 3 kids. The dad was kind of not super involved, and so she never felt like she was getting enough attention as a kid. And, I don't think that that's always conscious, by the way. Like, it's a feeling, it's not something you're thinking, right?
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
she had all kinds of crazy conditions. She fractured her back. She had scoliosis. She got hit by a car, all these different things. And even though she couldn't predict getting hit by a car or having scoliosis or any of these things, what she knew was that it got all the attention focused on her, and it was one-on-one because she'd be in the hospital and her mom would be there to visit. And then, when that was no longer available to her, she found herself in really chaotic, toxic relationships
Yeah.
because she not only she got used to the pain,
Mm-hmm.
and she'll say, I traded physical pain for emotional pain because that's
Exactly.
just how it evolved with her, right? That was
Yes.
the adaptation. But I'm concerned. We need to talk. Are you okay? And this is high level. It's not so high level for you and I because we're seeing it and we're assessing that actually within our clients all the time, to help them perhaps see this lens through which they're living. For someone that's listening to this, that sounds like it's far fetched. Don't judge it. Just sit with it for a bit.
Exactly. Exactly. Just seek to understand, and
Mhm.
because we all adapt to be seen and heard. Like we're all trying to protect ourselves at every moment and get our needs met. And we're going to do that in any way we can.
100%. So this is a great place to end it. We'll definitely be having Sherry back because what I really want to talk about is just more psychoeducation of things that we can really provide to the listeners because you're clearly in the space. I'm in the space and I know we can jam out on it. What do you want to leave the clients understanding? I know that you mentioned that you have this course. Can you share a little bit more about the course, what people could get from this course, where they could find it?
Sure. So my course is Discover Your Roadmap to Healing, Learn How to Navigate Your Life and Live in Joy. And it's 10 modules. And it really talks about my philosophy. And I share some of my story, just about how everything's an opportunity. So everything that happens, instead of being like, poor me, or just really looking at how am I meant to grow and learn from this. And I have many different grounding and healing tools that I provide to help people to reconnect to themselves and
Mhm.
grow and heal. So the course is self-paced. And then every month I have a community connection call where people can hop online and share what's going on, what's coming up for them in the course, talk about any support they need as they're going about the course. And they could also, if they want extra support, have one-on-one sessions with me as they are going through the course. But I have found after 30 years, I'm sharing the same thing with every single person.
Yeah.
Because these are just valuable tools, and they're all about helping people to understand themselves. And I always say the most important subject to learn about is the subject of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And all of our roadmaps are different based on how we've taken in our environment. So helping people to see that and really look at how what's happening in the present is threading back to the past so that they can heal and be more in the present moment today, more connected, more in joy, more grounded, and just more in self-love and love for everybody on the planet.
How can people find that course? Where can they go to find it?
So my website is holistic psychotherapy CT as in Connecticut.com.
Perfect. So that's going to be in the show notes. Sherry, thank you so much. I hope that all the listeners felt seen and heard and understood, because I think we talked about a lot of global, universal things here, and that's important for people to understand. If Sherry can say it and you can resonate with it, it's a clear sign that you're not so unique with your own problems, in the sense that we're all kind of walking with the same story. Just a different rendition, a different chapter. So thank you so much for coming on and making the time. And again, all of the information, guys, will be in the show notes. If this episode spoke to you, I highly encourage you to hit subscribe wherever you're listening so you can be notified whenever podcasts are dropped, which is every single Monday. Thank you so much for joining us. Take care.